Let's see. Oh, it already posted on my Twitter. So that's great. So if you guys want to go on my Twitter and repost it there, it's also on EFI's. It's also on Matthew's Twitter as well.
Cool. Yep.
And I think I'm hearing myself. No, I think it's not too bad, actually.
Let's see.
We'll give it a minute to let people hop on.
Sounds good.
Matt was asking if we could do a Twitter Spaces at the same time we were doing this, and I'm like, I'm sure there's a way to figure it out, but I'm not going to figure this out in 30 minutes. So
Right.
you'd probably have to have your phone like on the side, and then when you're ready to speak on the space, you'd have to. It would be too much. So
Yeah.
if we're either going to have to do a Twitter Space or we'll do this, but I think we have a good amount of people who have hopped on already. So let's jump right into it. Thank you guys for hopping on. It's 11 a.m. Eastern on a Friday. So if you want to watch it now, great. If you want to watch it later, it'll be available for replay. It's on Twitter, on mine, on Matthew's, on the EFI Twitter as well. It's on YouTube. It's on our Educational Freedom Institute Facebook at the same time. So this is a topic that a lot of people have been floating around the idea, but no one has really gotten into the weeds. So we have a Republican trifecta going into 2025. We have Trump won by a lot, and we have Republicans controlling the House and Senate. A lot of people are talking about the Department of Education, getting rid of it. That's the low-hanging fruit on the minds of some people, at least. And then other people are talking about school choice. Today, we're going to talk about the National Education Association, the largest teachers union in the country, how it has a federal charter, and maybe we should get rid of it, or maybe there's something else we can do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my co-host, Matt Nielsen. You can see on his screen, he has his handle there, so you can go follow him at Matthew Nielsen on X. He's the founder of the Educational Freedom Institute, where I'm also the executive director. And Matt's also the chair of the board at the Educational Freedom Institute. He's based in Phoenix, Arizona, the land of education freedom, where they have universal school choice, first state to actually fully implement it. Mm-hmm. And our special guest today is Paul Zimmerman. He is a senior counsel at the Defense of Freedom Institute, and he's going to. He wrote a great report. I'll include on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And it was published this year, and it talks about a lot of details on the history of the largest labor union in the country's federal charter, the NEA, when it started. He talks about the history. He talks about what we can do with it. A lot of people are talking about just getting rid of it altogether. I think Paul has perhaps some better ideas of what we can do instead of just getting rid of it altogether. So Paul's actually based in D.C. You got to give it to him. Sorry about that, Paul. I used to live in D.C. too, but now I'm in Texas. So Paul, take it away. Tell us a little bit about the history. First of all, actually, you actually run something at the Defense of Freedom Institute called the Teachers Union's Accountability Project. What sparked that? What's the point of that kind of silo in your group? And then get into the history of the federal charter, because a lot of people have no idea when it started and what it actually does. And so, Paul Zimmerman, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Corey, and thanks, Matt, for having me on the podcast. Let me start with the Defense of Freedom Institute, or DFI. It was founded in 2021 by two former DeVos Education Department senior appointees who wanted to kind of keep the momentum going for freedom in education, to try to beat back the Biden administration's attempts to engage in federal overreach on education issues. And so I work a lot on the regulatory side of things, on federal regulations. But I also focus on this Teacher Union Accountability Project, which is focused on just the deleterious effects that the teachers unions, and especially the National Education Association, which we'll be talking about today, and the American Federation of Teachers, which are the two biggest teachers unions in the country, the effects that they are having on American education, and the ability to for every student to get the kind of education that they deserve. And so we spotlight through communications efforts, but also through reports like the one we'll be discussing today, kind of a deep dive. We want to provide a deep dive resource on these teachers unions. We published a strike map, which is another portion of our activities, which talk about illegal and other strikes that are happening throughout the country that are keeping students out of classrooms and are often
and they're illegal in most states, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
but
Massachusetts had a ton this year, and they just keep doing them. And
exactly. And they're harming students. I think the unions know that they harm students, but they do them anyway. So
before you continue, what is something we can do about the illegal teacher strikes? Because they just keep doing them. And Massachusetts was in the headlines like a month ago. Several small unions were striking in Marblehead and some other areas as well. And what can we do about that to stop those strikes? And what are we doing, and what should we be doing?
Well, certainly, I think that the new administration needs to take a look at all of the tools that they can possibly muster from the Labor Department and the Education Department to regulate the local unions and also to stop these illegal strikes. But really, I think that it's up to the state officials to enforce the law, and anyone who's affected by these strikes need to go to their attorney generals in their state, go to their state education officials and say, hey, look, our kids are not able to be in the class. They're not learning during this time. They're losing opportunities. And we have to scramble for childcare when we have to, we're being impacted as well. And my hope is that some people will discover some of the litigation tools that they can engage in, go to the courts to sue these striking unions that are violating the law. And I think that will be important as well. So just to get back to the National Education Association, which is funding many of these strikes, and obviously is contributing to the harm that's happening when kids are out of school. So the NEA has a long history. It was first called the National Teachers Association. It was founded at a meeting in Philadelphia in 1857. So it's been around for a long, long time. And the purpose of this report, just the long and short of it, is that that organization that was founded in 1857 is no longer anything that resembles the organization that we see today. The organization initially was organized to promote teacher professionalism and also student achievement. Try to encourage schools to hire teachers who teach the right way and actually, give students the knowledge that they need to succeed in life. It was renamed the National Education Association in the late 19th century. It received a federal charter from Congress in 1906 during the
Did they rename themselves because is that when they started to branch out and it was not just teachers, they wanted to have support staff included in the union too, or was there a reason for the name change, or is that just?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a reason for the name change, was that they were branching out into including superintendents. They were branching out, including other education officials, anyone, involved in education who wanted to support education professionalism and student learning. The NEA, the name was a signal that anyone who was interested could join. And so that's an important point, that it wasn't just about teacher salary and teacher benefits, but it was really about student achievement and advancement in schools.
So student achievement being one of the primary purposes or founding principles of the NTA originally, and then the NEA. That's an interesting idea given 2019's representative assembly.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Right.
I can read from the charter language in 1906, and the purposes of the NEA at that time were to elevate the character and advance the interests of the profession of teaching, and to promote the cause of popular education in the United States. And now look at how far we've come from that to an NEA that doesn't support any of those interests.
Right.
Right. They voted it down. It was to realign their mission to be about students again, and they voted it down. Right. I mean, it's just, and then they took it off. They scrubbed the website after people started calling it out, because they used to put their resolutions online and used to be able to go look up past resolution. You can't do that anymore. Thankfully, some people internet archived a bunch of them and put them on X. But so let's fast forward to 1906. How did that fight kind of come about? They had, I think your report said 5,000 members at the time. Fast forward to today, they have like 3 million or so members. I think less now because they're bleeding members. But from 5,000 to 3 million, it's nowhere near what it used to be. But when they were lobbying Congress to get this federal charter, what were the discussions like?
Yeah, so the discussions were about how the NEA at that time was interested in furthering the cause of education. It was an organization that at the time was not unlike the American Bar Association or the American Medical Association of the time. It's really about professionalizing, the teaching profession and giving the teachers the tools that they needed to teach students. And so the idea behind the charter was to really give the NEA a little bit more heft, give it more notoriety through a congressionally granted charter, and make its principles more appealing. That's what the NEA wanted. And so Congress granted it this charter. And it in the discussion, it was all about how the NEA was an altruistic organization, just disinterested, wanting to advance learning opportunities and the teaching profession. And they really didn't discuss, obviously, because they didn't exist at the time, political activities by the NEA. They didn't discuss lobbying. They didn't discuss collective bargaining by the NEA, because anyone at the time would have considered these things absolutely out of bounds for this kind of organization to engage in. So really, the point that I'm making is that in 1906, Congress could not have imagined what the NEA became in terms of its influence on public education, its malign, activities that it engages in, and it's basically it's serving as a function of the Democratic Party, or a supporter of just one political party.
So how much of their money goes to the Democrats each cycle?
So the Commonwealth Foundation engaged in a pretty good analysis of this, and it found that about $108 million as of a few years ago were going to political causes among the NEA and its affiliates throughout the United States. Of course, the NEA reporting is woefully inadequate, and it only says it spends like a fraction of that. But then it sends the money to its affiliates to spend in local and state elections, and so they dumped
$6 million into the Kentucky ballot measure on school choice to try to. I mean, in Kentucky, so that they have so much resources that is basically being extorted from the taxpayer through the government school system. But how much of as a percentage is the NEA money going towards Democrats as opposed to Republicans? Yeah,
we're talking like 98 to 99% of its funding by some.
And those 2% are just Republicans in name only, I guess.
Right.
The ones who do take the money. We have a bunch in Texas. They lost a lot of their primaries recently, but that's some. Right. It's become the political kiss of death for Republicans. So, were there any no votes back in 1906 when they passed this? Did anybody say, hey, something fishy is here, or this isn't the role of the federal government, or do we not have that vote in front of us?
It was very broad support. The only people who did not support it were just talking about part of the charter that discussed how the NEA funding would occur and how decisions over funding would be made. So there was no discussion about anything that we're talking about today. It was really about internal policies of the organization.
Does Randy Weingarten ever come out and say, hey, look, I'm a National Teachers Union too. AFT, we're pretty good. We have 1.8 million members, according to them. So why don't we get a federal charter too? Have they ever made a case like that, or do they just not care?
I think that Randy Weingarten and the AFT recognize how that they want to be more independent, and that they're not very interested in the potential responsibilities that could go along with a federal charter. The NEA has a little bit more historical baggage in terms of having this charter, and I think it doesn't want people to really focus on it. But it could really be an important tool by Congress.
Okay, so tell us about that. So tell us why would Randy say, okay, I'm not even going to get into this because there's these potential downsides, and what are those downsides, and why, or has the NEA ever complied with any of those things? And if so, what are those things? And if not, what should we do about it?
Yeah, so the NEA was really was abiding by the charter, but it really just changed character over its first 50 years. Again, as you said, its membership shot up from about 5,000 at the time that it had its charter to about 600,000 in 1956. The character of education changed. There were far more people graduating high school, being students, going into college, and also collective bargaining, the discussions around collective bargaining change. And so the NEA started to become this politicized behemoth that was engaged through its affiliates in collective bargaining throughout the country. Now, I think the opportunity that the charter offers is to kind of reverse some of those developments. Basically, what we would like to see at DFI is Congress step up and take it back to 1906, get rid of the political spending that the NEA does, prohibit it from doing that kind of spending, prohibit it from supporting strikes.
How much do they spend on politics as opposed to representation? What's the latest?
It's less, and as I said earlier, I think it was over $100 million as of a few years ago on political spending, and it's much less than that in terms of representational activities that they spend on their actual members, and so it is focused on putting people in office. And then, of course, just as a side note, those same people that they put in office at the local level are the people who are negotiating union contracts with them, which is a total conflict of interest.
So the big switch, Paul, it sounds like, is when the federal government, and if I remember right, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it during the JFK administration that government employees were allowed to unionize? Am I getting that
exactly right?
Yeah.
Right.
So during his administration, he allowed for that to happen. Interestingly, FDR, this is totally weirds me out, but FDR said no,
right,
which is crazy given everything else FDR did. But
he's against public sector unions altogether, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. He was against public sector unions altogether. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's crazy given what he did during. Anyway, I don't understand.
Even he had something. A broken clock is right. I mean, it's reminding Randy Weingarten was on MSNBC the other day, and she said, my members don't really care if we have the Department of Education or not. She went on to say, well, we just want the money. We don't really care about the administrators over in DC. Yeah. But it's like, should I be against abolishing the Department of Education now that Randy Weingarten has said maybe it's an okay idea? Maybe I got something wrong. It's kind of like how she's. This is
her two times a day. She's right.
Yeah.
Well, you look at the history of that, and the reason that the AFT is not so big on the Department of Education is that it was the NEA's priority, and so the NEA and the AFT were always fighting over bargaining in various school districts, the NEA wanted the Department of Education, and I think the AFT recognized that the Department of Education would just be an NEA puppet, if it was created. So the AFT doesn't care about the Department of Education to the same extent. And just on collective bargaining, I mean, just to throw something out there, yeah, no one thought that collective bargaining was legal, I don't think, before the 1960s, when this shift toward public sector unionism happened. And the idea that a union and people that they elect through campaign finance dollars can just get together in a room and set school policies that aren't being set by the people in the district, but instead are just being set behind closed doors, would just have struck everyone as absurd just as recently as 1950, 1940s during the FDR era.
That was when the big switch happened, right? So the political giving, it really, not that they weren't trying to maneuver politically prior to that time, but they really became, and this is a question, it sounds like they really became active and effective. Maybe that's the way to say it. They became much more effective once they could actually unionize and kind of throw their weight around. Does that sound right to you?
I think that's right. I think these things were, to an extent, happening at the same time. The NEA, especially after it got its charter and started to advocate for teachers as opposed to education as a whole, just teacher benefits and salary as opposed to schooling of children. It started to want to advocate for federal spending on public schools, just massive levels of public spending in order to get federal involvement increased in education. So in 1965, through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that finally happened. There were massive, it was the first kind of massive influx of federal spending and the requirements that go with federal spending into local, public education. And so that was the point where the NEA turned away from its 501c3 status and started to say, okay, we're really just a political advocacy.
So could you see more of what Randy Weingarten was saying from other unions? Like, go ahead, get rid of the Department of Education. We don't want to have to deal with any of the rules that come from DC. We just want the money. If you're going to block grant the money back to us, like we saw in Senator Mike Round's bill, I'm sure you've read that one from South Dakota, Returning Education to the States Act, block grant the funding back to the states. You would think the unions would be okay with that. Randy came out against his specific bill. But besides the point, is there a deal to be made with the unions to get rid of the department, but keeping what they want, which is a lot of the money?
I would be very surprised if that deal is possible. There are probably people you could talk to are far more knowledgeable than I am about the internal machinations that would go on. But I think that the NEA and the AFT like to be able to have a kind of captive audience in Washington that they can resort to and pressure in forcing the requirements that go along with the money. And if it all went to the states and there was decision making in each particular state, that would
be harder for them to lobby. Yeah.
Although they still have a captive audience in those state legislatures, so maybe they should think about that, and maybe there is a deal to be struck there. So I see what you're saying, and maybe there's an
so Republicans have a trifecta. We got Linda McMahon going to be the education secretary. Let's get ready to rumble. Hopefully she's a wrecking ball, but Republicans have a trifecta, and there's this group, the NEA. 90% of their money goes to Democrats. What can the Republicans do in 2025 immediately when it comes to this federal charter, and what do you think is the best plan of action?
Yeah, so I would talk about two potential plans of action, and I think both are legitimate. The first, and I know you're aware of Representative Bob Good's proposal to strip the NEA of its charter.
Yeah.
I think he's absolutely right, and people who want to go that route are absolutely right that the NEA is not an organization in its current makeup that is such a harmful labor union that engages in political activity for the Democratic Party that it should have a federal charter.
Real quick on that note, before
yeah.
you go on to the second point, Paul, isn't the NEA the only union that has a federal charter?
That, as far as I am aware, that's correct, and I totally believe that's right.
And there's only like 100. There's only 100 organizations or so that have a federal charter overall.
That's right. Yeah, it's a very limited number of organizations, and these are organizations like the International Olympic Committee, or and
not partisan at all.
Boy Scouts.
Right. Well,
Girl Scouts.
The only I looked up in the report. The only and I think the Freedom Foundation found this out in their great report on a similar issue on this issue on the NEA charter. But the only other organization that engages in this kind of like blatant political activity like the NEA does is the American Society of Horticulturalists. And they spend like $24,000 on, lobbying.
Big money.
Big money.
All due respect to America's gardeners, totally fine. But I don't think that compares to the level of political activity that the NEA engages in.
NEA is the largest labor union in the country. So, I mean,
exactly.
And they're doing the most political crap, giving all their money. So we can go the route of just, all right, let's take it away, and we have a bill for that. What are the things you lay out in your report that we can do instead that might not sound as cool? It sounds cool to just say you have special privileges, let's take it away. Could we use the power of Congress to go another route?
Absolutely. Yes. And so our report calls for a change in governance and transparency at the NEA rather than abolishing its charter, using that charter as a hook to really regulate the activities that the NEA is engaging in and stop it from going down this destructive path that it's going down. So we recommend that Congress create a board of governors that will be made up of 3 members that could be structured in various ways. It could be 2 cabinet members and 1 private citizen, but it would be able to reject policies and decisions of the NEA. It would be appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. And it also would be able to scrutinize the inner workings of the organization and ensure that the NEA is living up to, what the charter says, the federal charter that Congress granted over 100 years ago, which is about elevating the character of American education and working for students. We would want the NEA to submit an annual report to Congress.
Have they ever done that?
They haven't to Congress, as far as I'm aware. There is a requirement that it submit annual reports to the Department of Education. We FOIA'd those reports from the Department of Education. Brick wall, no response. Apparently, with the new leadership in the Department of Education, we would love to see them investigate whether those reports are coming in. Whether
it sounds like they've never held their end of the bargain up.
Exactly right. There's a charter, and it sets out the responsibilities of the NEA, and the NEA is ignoring that. So what we want to turn it right. If the NEA is not abiding by the terms of its charter, we want the Attorney General to be able to investigate and file a lawsuit forcing it to do so in federal court. We want to prohibit lobbying and campaign activities by the NEA. And we want to also open up its annual meetings. You mentioned that in 2019, it kind of closed the doors to its resolutions. It has closed the doors to its annual meetings. You go online, you try to look up the resolutions, and you get a firewall. You get blocked. This is a
Mhm.
federally chartered
I'm blocked.
organization.
I'm blocked by the NEA. I could sue, right? You're gonna represent me. They sued.
Yeah.
They blocked me. It must have been a few years ago. It's been a while. Becky hasn't blocked me yet, but the NEA account
Yeah.
blocked me. And if they have a federal backing, there's almost a case to be made that this is a First Amendment violation. Maybe.
Yeah, I would look into that. I mean,
Because
I think,
wasn't Trump not allowed to block people or something because he's a
Yeah.
your
absolutely.
representatives
As a political
aren't
figure.
supposed to do that. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's totally inappropriate whether it's illegal or not.
Yeah.
I think as a federally chartered organization, you got to open your doors. It bills itself in its representative assembly that happens every year. It bills itself as the largest democratic deliberative assembly in the world. But people aren't allowed to see what it does. It's secretive. So let's open the doors to that and just require them to publish their resolutions. Finally, we would require them to change their name, go back to their roots
Teachers.
as the National Teachers Association. Really talk about what their real focus is, and get rid of all this like lobbying unionized stuff. Go back to the roots. Teacher professionalism is really what it should be all about.
So we can use their federal charter against them, basically, which this sounds really good. And there's basically no downside for Republicans, right? Like, because some people say, oh, well, if the federal government does this, well, what happens when the Democrats are in charge again? So like with these changes that you're proposing, it doesn't seem like, okay, well, if a Democrat wins next time around and they have the House and the Senate, whenever that is, I don't see how they could use this transparency of the NEA against Republicans unless for some reason NEA starts donating all their money to Republicans, which it's never going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying. First of all, I would just say I don't think that we're using it against the NEA. I don't think we're using these requirements against them. I think it's trying to restore the original purpose of the organization. It's kind of like going back to the founding, documents and the founding purpose of.
Yeah, but they're going to cry about it. They're going to lobby against
Sure.
it.
Yeah, true. Absolutely.
Which is, hey, that's a loser for them.
Right.
Introduce a bill. We want transparency, and then have the NEA say, no, we gotta have secrecy, even though we have the backing of Congress.
Well,
Exactly.
and wouldn't they just say, okay, fine, we don't want the charter anymore?
Yeah, I think that they would say that. I would like to see how they would roll back the charter, because it would require congressional action. If they want to,
I love that.
So now instead of the initial bill where we're trying to revoke it, they're begging for a bill to revoke it, and
exactly.
Right.
Wait, so hold on.
Do it.
Yeah, exactly. So you know this better than I do, Paul. You're a JD. You can walk Corey and I through the legalities of this, okay? So Congress gave them a charter. Since they got a charter in 1906, they've strayed far from their purpose. They've become essentially a PAC. They're a super PAC. That's what they are.
Right.
That's attached to a teachers union. That's how they get all of their funding. They don't go out and get donations from large funders. They take money through teachers' paychecks and then repurpose it for their political action committee. And so that's what they've done, right?
Right.
They're essentially the biggest 501c4 or super PAC in this country. So that's the way that they're operating right now. If they go back to Congress and they say, hey, you know what? Never mind. Just we don't want the charter anymore. If you guys are going to use it as leverage to get us to do things that you want us to do, we should have some independence here. Shouldn't we be able to say, look, guys, it was a long time ago. Things change. The 60s happened. We got some freedom to move around in the political space, to unionize, all that kind of stuff. And just take it back. You're telling us right now that Congress would have to say, okay, fine, we'll just take it away. Like Bob Good, that's his bill, right? Bob Good's bill would just say, You don't get
They'd
it
have to
anymore.
back that bill. Yeah, they'd have to back that bill.
But your proposal is they can't just walk away. We already know that. It sounds like they can just say, we don't want it. And here's my affidavit. Here's my, we're filing
We're going to take a vote on it.
Charter.
Yeah.
They don't get to do that. They can't, of their own volition, sneak out from underneath the purview of Congress. Is that right?
I looked at their charter, and anyone could go online and look at their charter, and I don't see any exit door in the charter that says
This is great.
It
was created by an act of Congress. Or requires an act of
created
Congress.
by an act of Congress. I believe there are that there are organizations that can decide that they aren't going to have their charter anymore. The NEA was not one of those organizations. So Congress has this hook. If they want to go set up shop elsewhere and call their, set up some new organization that does what it's doing, as long as it's abiding by the law, which, obviously funding illegal strikes and things like that, that's not really abiding by the law. They could do that. But there's a congressional charter, and the Congress is in charge of the charter.
So they would have to hollow themselves out completely.
Could they say that's the NTA's federal charter? That's not the NEA's.
Well, I mean,
we changed names already. So
right. Well, by act of Congress, it would rename them, the NTA under our proposal, and you could rename it, the National Commission for Student Achievement, or whatever you want to call it. But I think the NTA is appropriate because that is really what their roots were about. So.
So do you need a bill to do what you're proposing, or could the education secretary just say, you're already required to do this, send over the information?
So the education secretary can require them to abide by the requirement of their charter. That says
so we don't need a bill.
Reports, annual reports on the disposition of their holdings and how they're contributing to that stuff. I think they could probably require reporting requirements to a certain extent in the Department of Education. To change the charter, you would need congressional action because Congress granted it.
Yeah. So we didn't do these requirements in Trump 1.0 because we didn't have your report. Basically, we weren't thinking about this aspect yet, right?
Right. And I think it's past time.
We're really talking about it.
This is why the report is called the neglected charter, because I think I think Congress and the presidential administrations that have been in existence since the charter were granted, they've just turned a blind eye, unfortunately, to to this horrible conduct by this largest labor union in the United States, and they need to focus, I think, on this. They need to focus on this issue again. I think it's been neglected, and now we have to use this information to our advantage and the advantage of kids and teachers. By the way, many teachers don't agree with the politics. So many teachers don't agree with the politics of the NEA. Millions of teachers are centrist or Republican. They don't support what the NEA is doing. They just don't know about it or don't know how their dues are going to fund these things. So we're trying to put attention on the NEA and also on this opportunity for reform.
Well, it's a great report. I got to be honest, for my thinking was what you had said, was Route 2. So Route 1 is the report that you wrote up, and you have some suggestions in there about using the charter as leverage to effect change within the NEA, which I totally agree with. But I'll come clean here. I was saying just take away the charter, take the Bob Good approach, which I think is still valid. Fine, sure, but I think the better way to actually
let them beg to take away the charter.
Yes, exactly.
Well, the hope would be that they accept transparency and they accept good governance. practices, and that they would change their ways. If they don't want to do that, then go to Congress again and get them to repeal get them to.
I can just imagine the tweets coming from Chicago Teachers Union, how they're going to be crying about this. They said it was racist to reopen the schools. Now they're saying it's racist to close schools that don't have any students. Everything is racist. Maybe they'll try to say that revoking or making them do their duties when it comes to the federal charter, their parent organization, the NEA, maybe they'll cry that it's racist to do that too somehow.
Holding us accountable.
They were saying it was misogynistic. You see the latest one, it was misogynistic. They said that about reopening schools too, but their latest is there was a report from the Chicago Tribune. Their editorial board called them out because 4 in 10 of the teachers there are chronically absent, and they spend about $30,000 a kid, and we're not getting our money's worth. And so they just called them out for that. And their response was to say, "You just hate women." What?
Right.
What's the connection? There's never any connection. But anyway,
No,
Paul.
it's horrible. Yeah. And
Paul,
they've they've totally lost control of the education systems in these municipalities. There needs to be widespread change and reform.
For sure.
So I just want to tell all of our listeners, in my thread, if you go under the stream that I'm sharing on X right now, you'll find a screenshot of the front page of his report. It's beautifully done. But also I have a link in there in the next tweet or post to the full report. It's what, like 30-page report. It's pretty beefy report. It has as much information as you could ask for. I was really excited to learn about the history of their federal charter and what we could do as opposed to just revoking it. I think this is a good move. I think Paul's he's onto something here, and it's something that the education secretary should listen to very closely going into 2025. So I'll point everybody to that report. I'll share it again on all of these channels. But Paul, any concluding thoughts? Where would you like people to follow you? Is there anything else you'd like to promote?
Just follow me. I'm at PF Zimmerman on Twitter, and also just follow at DFI Policy on Twitter. You can visit our website at dfipolicy.org. You can find some great resources on our teacher union accountability project. There are some other reports that I think you'll be interested in if you're interested in this topic and just the general advancement of student achievement and educational freedom across the United States.
Absolutely. So I'll go on Twitter, X, and put your handle so people can go follow you there. And thanks again, Paul Zimmerman, Defense of Freedom Institute. He's senior counsel there. And thanks to everybody for joining. This is the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. I'm your host, Corey DeAngelis. Go follow Matt Nielsen as well. He's the founder of the Educational Freedom Institute at Matthew Nielsen. Thank you guys so much. We'll be doing more of these podcasts on a more regular basis. And thanks for tuning in.